Hi, I'm Ryan Kelly. Mortgage interest rates have started to rise, but at the Home Loan Expert Office, we're still locking loans in the twos. How much can you save? Let's find out now. Visit thehomeloanexpert.com.
Well, welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the Ferrario Face-Off here at Claibs Online. Long time since we've had a time to converse with each other about Blues in the NHL, but we thought we needed to do so now because things have changed a lot over these last couple of weeks. Along with my good pal Mike Claiborne and Alex Ferrario, the pre- and post-game host for Blues Radio. And Claibs, let's just start it off with this. The last time I think you and I talked, we felt like things were not going in the right direction for the Blues. But since then, I don't know if we could say that things have shifted, but it definitely feels more like a roller coaster now rather than just a plunge right down into the dust.
Well, I agree with you, Alex. I think the last time we talked, I think the Blues had one foot in the grave. Now I wouldn't say that they have that foot totally in the grave. They have shown some life, and, there's still some work to do. But one thing can be said, or two things. If they get in, and that's a big if, they would have earned it. There's no question they would have earned it. And two, if they get in, they could be a handful for somebody. The question is, will they have enough depth to hold up? Because they've had some real big injuries here recently. So they can't afford to have some key people go down and thinking they could have a long run in the playoffs. But a lot of ifs at stake. But you know what? As you mentioned, they're a lot better off now than what they were, let's say, 2 weeks ago.
Well, let's start with this, Clay, because I think the last time you and I talked was pre-trade deadline, and we talked about how Doug Armstrong's going to have to do something to help this team. It really felt like that they were going to make a move, and then, of course, they went on that 3-game win streak. He stood pat with his roster, and here we are today. Did you agree with that move, or did you think that Doug Armstrong should have made something?
Yeah, I agree with it because I didn't really see anything that was a difference maker out there. I didn't see anything that was going to be cheap, because everybody's looking for draft choices, and the Blues, in my opinion, are just a little thin right now on players who can immediately help. And we've had a chance to see some of those kids that they've called up from Utica. We've seen the taxi squad guys, and while they show promise, they weren't real hardline contributors. So I think they'd like to be a little deeper. The Clem Costin experiment, we'll never know, because all of a sudden he decided to start playing, and their postseason continues. So I really felt like Doug Armstrong didn't have any real assets that he could afford to part with. And I think the other thing that comes into play, he had to have some people around in the event or for the expansion draft. That's something that you have to have in the back of your head. And I think also, he's got to make some decisions about how this roster is going to look for next year. I don't think you can come back with this same roster. You're going to have to make some changes, and I think it's probably better to do them in the offseason than to make an emotional move in season. So I was good with him not doing anything.
I was too, and I really did not want to see him trade away that first-round draft pick, to the point that you just made.
Yeah.
You need prospects right now, and you've spent the last 3 seasons trading those first-round picks, and it's worked. You've gotten Ryan O'Reilly, and you've gotten Braden Shen, and you got Sundqvist along with Clem Costin. So it paid off for the team, but I think you needed to keep it that way. But that's an interesting point, Claibs, that I wanted to talk with you about, because you go into the offseason, and a lot of people looked at that trade deadline and said, well, if you're Doug Armstrong, you should probably trade a Jaden Schwartz because you could get a nice haul for him. Being an unrestricted free agent, he matches Craig Berube's system. But on the flip side of that, the money he's going to be looking for, and for how inconsistent he is as a goal scorer in the regular season for you, makes that a really interesting kind of seesaw effect, because you either bring back a guy who everyone loves on that roster, but you pay him a little more money than maybe he's worth in terms of what he scores.
Can't do it.
You can't do it.
No.
Or you go out there and you find somebody who can score more goals and be a second-line winger for you.
Yeah, and you know what? He's a serviceable player. I think because of the fact he has a tag first-round pick, former first-round pick, we expected more. Solid two-way player, too inconsistent scoring-wise for my taste, and a guy who is in position defensively a lot, but doesn't really bring you a lot more. I mean, he's not a physical player. As we mentioned, he's not a guy who scores a lot of goals, but he is in position defensively, and maybe there is a chemistry element that's important. But, I can't pay him more money. I can't. And that doesn't mean he can't go somewhere else and truly flourish. And if that's the case, then so be it. I mean, those players move along all the time. And if you don't think so, ask the Buffalo Sabres what they thought of Ryan O'Reilly before they moved him.
That's very true. And we saw how that paid off. So
Mm-hmm.
that's going to be the interesting element for Doug Armstrong. But look, you look at what's going on right now, Claibs. They're on a 2-game win streak after beating Colorado back to back. If you go through their last 7 games, they're 4-3. And in those 3 losses, they've been 1-goal losses with the understanding of empty net goals have gone in. They're playing much better. The part for me, especially after the most recent game against Colorado, the even strength play is back. And look, power play still has to be figured out in terms of penalty kills when you go against the other team. Colorado basically had your number every game that you played against them this season on the power play. But at even strength, Claibs, the number that stuck out to me, you won 3 games against Colorado in the 8 games you played them this season. And in total, those 8 games, you outscored Colorado 15-13 at even strength. So for me, even strength play for the Blues has been a success. It's about getting the penalty kill side of things back under wraps.
Well, that's been the problem all year long. Special team play, power play has been abysmal. Penalty killing is been not as good as it needs to be. And let's face it, Colorado skates too well for you not to be able to be better on special teams. One of the other things we have to take into account with Colorado in these most recent games, they haven't been playing with a full deck.
Yeah.
Their motivation really may not be there, considering, they're going to be, they know they're in the playoffs. They've got a little bit of a chase going on with Vegas, but overall, I think it may be hard to get up for the St. Louis Blues in this situation. So I don't want to put too much into the notion that, boy, we got them where we want them. That's not the Colorado you may see in about a month or so. But with that said, if we weren't talking about the wins, we'd be talking about wait until next year, because they would definitely be out of it by now.
It's interesting because if you look at the way that Colorado probably views the Blues, it's the same way that the Blues have viewed Arizona this season when they played.
Good point.
Very
good point.
Like you look at them and you're thinking, oh, well, come on, we're better than this team on paper.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to worry about them. And then, of course, they go out there and they perform. So it's an interesting element that goes into it. But let's hone in on a couple of players, Claibs. The first one I want to talk with you about is Jordan Binnington. Now, we've seen it's like the tale of 2 Binningtons this season. We've seen the best of them and we've seen the worst of them. And the worst of him seems to be he's giving up those timely goals that seem to kill the Blues. But in the most recent stretch of hockey, he's been making the timely saves, and whether it's gone against them or for them, he's kept the team in the hockey game. And I'll go back to that first game, that first victory that the Blues had against the Avalanche on Saturday afternoon. Claibs, he made that save in the first period where it could have been 3-0, and that shifted the momentum for Ryan O'Reilly to go out there and score back-to-back goals. You got to have this Jordan Binnington if you want a shot at making the playoffs and making a run.
Yeah, you're right. And let's face it, you look back over the history of this game, when you get in the playoffs, there's always a hot goalie somewhere at the end of the Stanley Cup run. And that's what they're going to need from him. And I really look at it, Alex, where he just got to make the first big save. Yeah. If he makes the first big save of the game, then things start to go in his direction. When he gets caught on his heels and all of a sudden, there's one behind him, there's another bad one he gives up, and now you're playing catch up for the rest of the night. And then that's when he starts to press. Teams have kind of figured out where his weak spots are, and he's tried to shore them up a little bit more. But when it's all said and done, he's got to be the first true line of defense with regard to making that first big save of the night and then trying to build from there.
It's always about body language with him, isn't it? Like,
yeah.
When you see one get past him and you see his head go backwards or he dips forward, like it seems when he does that, then the rest of the guys in front of him do that as well. But when he's confident or when he's making those saves, that's when the rest of the guys it feels like it's like a release of air where it's like, okay, Binnington's here for us tonight, boys. Let's go and just play our game.
Well, it's one of those things where I think sometimes he gets frustrated too, because he's not getting a lot of help in front of him. There's a lot of turnovers, and we don't have to go through the list of names, but there seems to be a constant list of certain people who have just made life in front of him miserable. And I think that can be a little frustrating too. So, I think that it's one of those things that you got to keep it simple. You can't overthink this. And I'm a believer that you win the shift, you win the period, you win the game.
Yeah.
You have to do what you do. And I think when we talk about Binnington, hey, just make the initial save. You let those other guys worry about the rebound. You don't make a juicy one available, but you make the first big save, and I think that puts everybody moving in the right direction.
You get that from the team as soon as you get the buy-in from individuals. And Craig Berube's talked about it, right? He's called this team mentally weak. He's called them soft. He's called them fragile. And it's finally, at least these last couple of games, Claibs, feels like it's starting to click for some of these guys that if you accept a role that Craig Berube's talking to you about, you're going to find success. And a perfect example is Vladimir Tarasenko. I mean, this is a guy who has missed nearly 2 years for the team, comes back, tries to do a little too much offensively and be the sniper that he was. Craig Berube's talked about him getting to the dirty areas, being aggressive in the offensive zone, and pucks are going to come for him. And you go to the game on Monday against Colorado, he scores that power play goal right in front of the net. That's not a Tarasenko area for this team. He's usually the guy that's set up like Mike Hoffman. But Tarasenko knows that, hey, if I go to the dirty areas, I'm going to score goals. It's what Berube's been telling me, and it pays off for him.
Yeah, the Tarasenko thing is a real head scratcher. And he's kind of like Schwartz, where if he's not scoring, he doesn't do much for you.
He's invisible. Yeah,
I mean, he's not a great defender. He's not going to play the body with any regularity unless somebody pisses him off. And he's just a guy. And unless he's shooting or at least putting himself in a position to shoot, he's kind of ineffective. You know, he and Hoffman have the same problem. And this is what made Brett Hull great. And I don't want to make the comparison of Brett Hull to these two. But you know what? The good players always are floating. They're looking for the dirty area where nobody's standing there or nobody would expect you to be there. And your teammates know that if you're floating, just keep your head up. If you keep your head up and if the shooter keeps a stick on the ice, it's amazing because it doesn't take him any time to get the shot off. And that's something that I think we have to take into account. But Tarasenko has become a little too stationary and is waiting on somebody to get it to him in a spot where everybody else can go out and defend him or defend the pass. And then all of a sudden it's a wasted shift. So he's got to be more assertive, going to the net. I mean, he's as strong as anybody on the team. So he's a hard guy to knock off the puck or move out of a spot. But he's just got to want to do it more. And I think that's one of the issues. Let's go back to when Craig Berube first took over. That was one of the issues they had then. And now it seems like it's reared its head once again. And how they deal with it at this point, we'll see. Maybe the dirty goal that he got the other night will be something that he can build on. But they've got to get more assertiveness out of him.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up because you go back to when Berube took over, Claibs, and he found a way to have Vladimir Tarasenko be more of a two-way forward. Now, was he great at it? No. But he wasn't as much of a liability on the ice defensively because Craig Berube told him, like, hey, you got to work just as much in the defensive zone as you work in the offensive zone. And again, it feels that way. And it feels that way for Mike Hoffman, too. It definitely feels that Craig Berube and the coaching staff, though, have kind of bought into the style that Hoffman plays. You don't see him out there as much at even strength ice time, but when the power play has come, he's on that first unit, and they have him set up much like Alex Ovechkin. Like, go to your wheelhouse, go to the one-timer, and make it happen. And it finally feels like they bought into that, where before it felt like you were trying to squeeze a round peg into a square hole.
Yeah, that's a very good point you make, Alex. Let's face it. Hey, Hoffman is who he is, okay? He's not going to change. I think what we tried to go from making him a Phil Esposito when he was really a Mike Bossy, or as you mentioned, or Alex Ovechkin.
Great comp.
You know, you find him on the weak side. You know, he's open. He's always ready to shoot. It doesn't take him any time to get it off. He's fairly accurate. And that means that the other team is going to have to overplay. And if they overplay, then there's going to be a little gap in the middle of the ice where you're going to have another guy who's going to have a chance for an even better shot in some cases.
It comes down to having four lines, though, doesn't it? I mean, like, you could talk all you want about having the top guys performing, but if those are the guys that are playing 21, 22 minutes of ice for you, they're going to be fatigued when it matters most. So that's why at least it feels like Craig Berube has found something. I personally loved the line on Monday of Robert Thomas and Jordan Kyrou and Ivan Barbashev. Now,
Barbashev has made every line he's been on this year better.
It's the same thing as Sundqvist. Like, when he's healthy, he makes everyone around him better. That line, though, is so funny because it could be awesome offensively for you, like we saw on Monday, where they're scoring goals, creating offensive chances, but it could also be a defensive liability for you because you do have two young guys that like to play off to the races style of hockey.
Yeah, but here's the one thing they have working for them. They both are good skaters, and they can make up maybe a shortcoming from time to time. which leads us to Zach Sanford, who would be a healthy scratch for the rest of the year, as far as I'm concerned. He's just been too inconsistent for the productivity he gives you. And I don't know what else Craig Berube could do other than, bring back Wayne Gretzky or Red Berenson or somebody. I don't know. I don't know what else you can do. It doesn't work. His style or his desire does not keep up with what this team needs from him. But so, you make a good point about depth, and you got to have the four lines. I think he's got just enough personnel to have four quality lines in the manner of what we witnessed over the last couple of games.
Yeah, and you're not getting anybody back. This is the team right now that you have in terms of forwards. This is the group that you're going with, whether it be 11 forwards, 7 defensemen, or you're pulling 12 forwards and somebody steps into that bottom role. On the defensive side, Claibs, a few more minutes I wanted to touch on with you. They've played without Colton Parayko a majority of this season. We saw it again Monday where he was a scratch for the Blues. He did skate on Tuesday with the team on the ice, so hopefully he'll be in the lineup on Wednesday against the Minnesota Wild. But it's very noticeable when you don't have Colton Parayko out there, there's a lot more of guys skating around trying to fill that ice, whereas when you have the 6'6" defenseman on the ice, that reach is something that has been desperate for this Blues team this year.
He's a minutes eater is what he is. You can double shift him. You can do a lot of things with him. And the other thing is, with everyone else, when he's not in a lineup, that means Krug plays more. That means Falk plays more. That means Scandella plays more. And these guys are going beyond their normal threshold of minutes. And at some point, it catches up to them. And the way they juggle defense pairings, that also creates a little angst with regard to having a feel for what the other guys are going to do. Is he going to jump up into play? Is he going to make sure he's the last guy behind? So there's so many things that go into it, and because there are extra minutes to try and fill. But the other question is, how effective is Parayko when he is playing, if he's really that hurt? There's some guys that can play through it, and they give you enough that that warrants them being out there. And then there are other guys who, when they're hurt, they're no use to you. And I think Parayko is right there on the fence on how valuable is he when he is hurt and in uniform.
And it feels like guys on the defensive side, Claibs, just don't know what their role is, right? Because Torrey Krug's playing an area that he probably was never playing in Boston, where he's playing more time in the defensive zone. He's getting more defensive starts because he's a top defenseman for this team. Whereas in Boston, he was the offensive guy. He played power play minutes. But a lot of that comes with the territory of Colton Parayko is not 100%. Marco Scandella's been in and out of the lineup this season. So guys are just trying to figure out where they fit in right now. Whereas before, we know a group of guys where they knew what their role was and they played it to the perfect ability that Berube wanted them to.
Yeah. It's still a work in progress. Although we're whittling it down now. If you don't know your role by now, then we probably made a bigger mistake in having you on the team. So,
right, what are we doing here?
Yeah, so this is still, and I think the Minnesota matchup is going to be an interesting one with regard to the challenges that they present to you, because they're really hot right now, and you're catching them at a time where they're going to look to really create some distance between the third and fourth spot, but also get themselves in a good playoff position, because they know they're going to face either Colorado or Vegas in that first round. So I think they want to make sure they have everything clicking and making sure everybody stays healthy. They're going to be a formidable opponent. And if the Blues can, in these next 6 opportunities, next 6-point opportunities, can get 4 of the 6, then I think the pressure goes back on Phoenix in what they're going to have to do in order to make sure they can hold on. Remember, the Blues have games in hand on the Coyotes, and I think the Blues have to make sure that they make Arizona pay for having those days off.
Well, and Arizona's got to worry about the Sharks and the Kings right now, who sit 4 and 5 points behind the Blues. So, I mean, they're making a little bit of a push for it as well. It's funny with Minnesota too, Claibs. Those 3 games, Minnesota's only 5 points away from that first place spot. So, I mean, people come into this and say, well, Minnesota doesn't have anything to play for because the Blues aren't going to catch them. They could potentially be the home team in the Honda West Division hosting the 4th place team. So, there's still a lot more desperation on Minnesota's side in these upcoming 3 games.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm loving it because everybody, including the Kings and the Sharks, have something to play for. And that's what's going to make this thing. You're going to scoreboard watch. There's no doubt about it. But I think the team who gets in 4th is going to be as dangerous as a team who's in first, because
Yep.
they've all gotten familiar with each other. There's no trick out of the bag that these teams aren't familiar with, and the familiarity that they have will breed some contempt if we get into the playoffs.
Let me ask you this, and I'll leave you with this one, Claibs. Who, in your opinion, would be the best Blues matchup in the first round if, hypothetically, we're saying the Blues make it into the playoffs?
Man, that's a great question. I don't know if there is a great matchup, or I don't know if they have an advantage.
Yeah.
You know, they most recently played Colorado, so maybe they're a little bit more familiar with them. But as we mentioned, Colorado's not playing with a full deck.
Yeah.
You know what, Alex? I think if you're the St. Louis Blues, you really don't care at this point. You just go out and play. Just play.
It reminds you of 18-19, though, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Like, you get in and everyone was saying, well, the Winnipeg Jets, look at the Winnipeg Jets. They're a powerhouse. It doesn't matter. If you're playing the way that Berube wants you to play, you can take down any one of those teams.
Absolutely. So, you know what? As I always say, just get in, because it's a new season for everybody. And how many times have we seen that visiting team take a game at home in the first two, and all of a sudden they get the home ice advantage, and the next thing you know, the home team never gets back to their own building. And I don't even know how much of an impact that's going to have, considering the the limited number of fans. Now, the Blues have had a very boisterous crowd, and I'm sure the other cities have too, but it's a different environment when you get to the playoffs, and that's something that we're going to have to wait and see how teams will react. The travel shouldn't be a problem, considering that they've kind of had these hokey schedules anyway, where they spend as much as a week or 10 days in a certain city. I think we have to worry about the fact that making sure nobody gets positive here. That could be a real downer for not only their team, but certainly the playoff opportunity. Blues have been good about it. The division has been pretty good. We've had a few, but I think that that's something you probably step it up a notch because of the back and forth that you're going to deal with.
I can't wait for it. We got 10 games down the stretch before the playoffs start. And of course, we'll have plenty of coverage for the Blues and the NHL playoffs for you here at Claibs Online on the Ferrario Face-Off. Claibs, it's great to catch up, my man. I know you're a busy one with Cardinals baseball on top of everything with Claibs Online. So I appreciate you taking some time out, and I look forward to chatting with you next week.
Well, I miss our hockey conversations, and I'm looking forward to talking hockey well into June.
I love the sound of that. Another cup run, and we'll have it here for you at Claibs Online. He's Mike Claiborne. I'm Alex Ferrario. Thank you so much for joining us at Claibs Online. Plenty more Blues coverage for you for the following weeks here at Ferrario Face-Off on Claibs Online.
The housing market is crazy, and homes are selling day one on the market. If you're even considering buying a home, you need a leg up on the competition. The 21-day closing guarantee, only available at thehomeloanexpert.com.